appear to think. Pop culture was a moral battleground during the Stranger Things years. Prince and Madonna, even the publicly squeaky clean Michael Jackson, were seen as sexual deviants to a populace far closer to pre-60s innocence than we see today. The era's collective tale seems to exist only in pieces. For a musical period whose popularity has never waned, particularly with a younger generation that venerates the decade's pop in much the way kids in the 80s themselves often look to the 60s with longing, there's been surprisingly little written about 80s pop per se. Apparently, everyone who loved music but hated the radio in the 80s was so worked up over it that they all wrote books. The titles on indie rock, hip-hop, post-punk, acid house, goth, new wave, and a non-stop torrent of punk micro-histories have created a lopsided effect. We now know far more about 80s music outside the mainstream than anything in that mainstream, unless we read a raft of individual artist bios. This brings us to methodology. Whereas my previous book, The Underground is Massive, was built on more than 300 interviews, Can't Slow Down is drawn primarily from archival material. It's strange how undercovered this period of pop has been, considering the sheer overload of frankly amazing source material on it. I read a lot of books and magazines, physical and digital, raided the shelves of a number of public and personal libraries, combed through oral history transcripts from 2 major music museums, and spent a lot of time Googling things. One of my favorite stories from the research came from that August, when a San Diego rock station, XHZFM Z90.3, suddenly had its plug pulled. The station's Mexican owner, Victor Diaz, revoked his contract with his American operators over low ratings. He enlisted his teenage sons instead to select the new playlist. The station's program director complained to Billboard that Diaz had sent us a letter last week informing us that he was going to take over the programming. The next day, his wife walked into the studio with a box of singles and told our announcers to insert these records, mainly American top 40 hits that didn't fit in at all with our programming, every 15 minutes. Pop music is easier to create, record, and disseminate than ever, but in 1984 it felt like the brass ring. There are a lot of chart placements mentioned in this book. My intention is to demonstrate why a heavily commercial era in pop music mattered. Gauging its popularity serves a necessary contextual purpose. That's one of the main things that changed. In rock culture, the pop charts stopped mattering so much during the 70s, when much of the music's leading edge was seen as in the LP cuts played on album-oriented rock AOR stations, rather than the singles on pop radio. This critical line held sway for many years, but in more recent years, music writing has shown a greater appreciation for the pleasures and craft of mainstream pop of that and any era. Our Pixies fan above might not have been able to hear those things as well a couple of decades ago when we had that conversation, but her present-day equivalent is much more likely to. Another change was that when Marsh wrote his singles book, the music business's regained bullishness still carried a charge only 5 years after the business having nearly sunk itself. In the early 2000s, even with Napster having already begun its termite work, the biz had been so extravagantly successful for so long that a once crippling downturn amounted to a blip. In a way, 1984 is the last year of the old world. As David Hepworth pointed out, both the hole in the ozone layer and acid rain were discovered in 1985. But 1984 was also a decisive year for technology both in and around the music world. Chapter 2 looks closely at some of those changes. That November, the Biz tip sheet Radio and Records ran an interview with Quincy Jones, who'd produced Thriller and had one of the savviest and most varied careers in show business. "I've seen the changes go from mono to stereo to quad," he said. "One thing that's bothered me for 34 years is the archaic record distribution system. With 250, 260 million people in this country, it's outrageous to get excited about 1 million albums." Instead, Jones proposed an Avon kind of system. Jones: "With computers around now, it would be very easy to get musical profiles of people's likes and dislikes. Maybe using TV to make impulse buying more accessible to more people. The screen lists whatever you're listening to. You say, 'I like that,' and point at the information on the screen. Then you hit 1 or 2 buttons that ask for your purchase selection and credit card number. Something in that direction." Radio and Records: "That would be a great way to chart sales electronically." Jones: "Right. And it could be possible in 5 years for you to have no inventory in your house.